Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in the Web Security Academy series. In today's video, we'll be covering lab number 3 in the Access Control Vulnerabilities module, titled User Role Controlled by Request Parameter. If you do not have an account on the Web Security Academy, you can get one by visiting the URL portswigger.net/websecurity and clicking on the sign up button. I already have an account and I am logged in, so to access the exercise, I'm going to click on Academy, go down, select the learning path, go down, select access control, go down one more time, and select lab number 3 titled User Role Controlled by Request Parameter. Alright, let's get started. This lab has an admin panel at /admin which identifies administrators using a forgeable cookie. Solve the lab by accessing the admin panel and using it to delete the user Carlos. You can log into your own account using the following credentials. Okay, so the target goal over here is to access the admin panel and use it to delete the user Carlos. And the way we're going to do that is by exploiting a broken access control vulnerability where access control is determined based on a cookie that we could alter. And hopefully we're going to alter that cookie in order to access the admin panel and then delete the Carlos user. And in order to understand how the application functions, we're given these credentials in order to log in as a regular user. And then once we're logged in as a regular user, we'll be able to see how this cookie is set and then potentially be able to change it. All right, let's access the lab. And while that loads up, let's open up Burp. So this browser over here is the inbuilt browser in Burp, and so all my requests are already going through Burp, and I don't have to alter the configuration of the browser or alter it in my Foxy proxy extension in order to make sure that the requests go through Burp. All right, the first thing we're going to do is go to my account and then log in with the credentials that we were given. Hit login. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark these requests or highlight them because they're going to be useful later when we script the exploit. So this is the request that was used in order to log in as the user that we were given. So I'm going to click on highlight and I'll highlight it as green. Notice over here that you get set 2 cookies. The first one is an admin cookie and the second one is a session cookie. So the session cookie is normal. What that means is it's assigning you a session so that it's able to identify you in subsequent requests. However, the admin cookie is a little bit abnormal. It says it's false, which means that you're not an admin. However, what happens if we set it to true? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the My Account request and we're going to send this to Repeater. So if we hit send right over here and we see if we have access to something called an admin panel, and let's make that lowercase, you can see over here we have 0 matches. Now let's set this to true and see if that gives us any additional access. And here we go. It says there's 2 matches. So if you go over here, it says you're given access to the admin panel because this cookie over here is used to determine access control rules in the backend. Now, to see this in the browser, what we're going to do is we're going to hit on Inspect, go to Application, and then in Cookies right over here, we're going to set this to True. Hit Enter. Let's close this and just click on My Account again. And here we go. We could see the admin panel right over here. Now, if we go back to Proxy over here, I'm just going to highlight this one as well because it's going to come in handy. And we're going to delete the Carlos user by clicking on Delete. And let's highlight this one right over here again. And here we go. It says, congratulations, you solved the lab. So we successfully completed the exercise by exploiting the broken access control vulnerability manually. Now let's script it. And if you're new to this channel and wondering why we're scripting the exploit, it's because I think that at some point in your career, you need to learn how to script exploits. And so we do that for every video. All right, let's go to our Python script. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to import the requests module. This is what allows us to perform HTTP requests. And then we're going to import the sys module. This allows us to use the command line, import URL lib3, and then we're going to say from BS4, import beautiful soup, and that'll allow us to parse the responses of the requests. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is say URL lib3.disable warnings, and I'm going to disable insecure request warnings, so exceptions. Okay, this looks good. Next, we're going to set our proxy setting. So that's HTTP 127.0.0.1, port 8080. And then we've got HTTPS, also set at HTTP 127.0.0.1, port 8080. So this is just the configuration for our Burp proxy so that we could pass our requests to Burp before they get sent to the application, and then any responses from the application get sent to Burp before they get sent to our script. What that helps us do is it allows us to debug our requests if our script is not working properly. Okay, next, we're going to create our main method. So we're going to say if name is equal to main, then call the main method. Okay, and let's define our main method right over here. We're going to say if the length of the command line arguments, so sysargv, is not equal to 2, then print the following usage instructions. So if the length of the command line arguments is not 2, that means the user ran this incorrectly. And so we need to help the user out a little bit by listing the usage instructions. So we're going to say name of the program, and then URL, and the name of the program is taken from the command line. Okay, and then we're going to also print out example instructions. Again, name of the program, and then let's say example.com, and we take the name of the program from the command line. Okay, this looks good. So this is our main method. It'll go into this if statement if the user runs it incorrectly. So what we want to do is also end the program. So we're going to say sys.exit -1 because the user ran it incorrectly. Now, assuming the user ran it correctly, what we want to do is start our session. So let's say request.session. And then we want to save the URL that the user put in the command line in a variable called URL. So that would be sys.argv1. And then we want to pass our session and our URL into the function delete user, which is used to delete the Carlos user. So we're going to say s, and it takes in the URL right over here. Okay, this looks good. So this is our main function. Now let's implement our delete users function. So that would be def delete user, and again it takes in the session and the URL. And now we need to implement our logic right over here. So let's say delete user logic. Now, before we implement this logic, we need to understand how it works, and that's why I highlighted all these different requests. So if you look over here, the first thing that we did is we logged in as the user. Now notice over here, in order to log in, it took in 3 parameters, the username, which we know, and then the password, which we also know, but it also took in a CSRF parameter. Now this CSRF parameter, so you could see TLU, is taken from the login page itself. So if we look for the CSRF parameter over here, you could see that it's from the login page. Now, if we try to log in without that CSRF parameter over here, it'll say that it's missing the CSRF parameter and it won't allow us to log in. So the first thing that we need to do is access the login page in order to, which would be this page over here. So let's highlight this one as well. So the first thing we need to do is perform a request to the login page, and it would be a GET request. Extract the CSRF parameter from over here, and then use it in order to log in as the user that we were given. So step number 1 is get CSRF token from the login page. And this is why, by the way, I really like to script all my exploits, because you properly understand how the application functions if you have to script it versus having to do it manually with Burp. So to do that, we're going to say login URL is equal to the URL that is given in the command line argument plus the endpoint in order to log in, which is /login right over here. So let's copy that and put it right over here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create another variable called CSRF token. And it'll be equal to the value that is returned in this function right over here. So get CSRF token. So this is a function that we're going to implement in a bit. It takes in the session. It also takes in the URL that we want to get the CSRF token from. And in this case, it's the login URL. Okay, so before we continue, so let's say rest of the code. Before we continue with that, we need to implement our getCSRF token function. So let's do that right over here. Let's say def getCSRF token. Again, it takes in the variable s and then a URL. And we're going to perform the get request. So we're going to say r is equal to s.get. It takes in the URL that is passed, which in this case is the login URL. We're going to set verify to equal to false because we don't want to verify TLS certificates. And we're going to set proxies to be equal to proxies so that this request goes through Burp. Now, if my script doesn't work, I could see the request in Burp and determine what went wrong. So I'll be able to debug the script. And then I'm going to say soup is equal to beautiful soup. The response text, and I'm going to set the parser to HTML parser. And then I'm going to say the CSRF token is equal to soup.find. And what we're looking for is an input element. So if you look over here, it's an input element, and it's of name CSRF. And the value of the CSRF token is in the value attribute. And that's essentially what we're doing over here. So we're going to say the name of the element is input. So search for the element input that has the name CSRF. And then from there, obtain the content of the value attribute. So it should output this right over here. And then we're going to say return this CSRF variable right over here. Okay, let's save that. Now, before I continue with my script, what I'm going to do is I'm going to print CSRF just to see if this is properly working. So go to terminal, new terminal, and I'm going to say Python 3, access control lab 03, and we're going to need the link to the application. And it probably timed out. Let's try that. And it did. So we're going to have to generate a new one. Okay, let's copy the link. Remove the trailing slash, hit enter, and we get an invalid syntax error. So if we go down right over here, I missed the second equal sign, so let's save that. Run it again. And here we go. So it outputs the CSRF token. So now I'm confident that my script doesn't have any errors and runs correctly. So let's clear this and minimize it a little bit. Okay, now once we've gotten the CSRF token, if we go back to Burp right over here, once we've gotten the CSRF token, the next step is to perform this request, which is a post request that takes in 3 parameters, the CSRF token, which I already have, and then the username and the password of the user that I need to log in to the application. So we're going to remove the print statement because we know this function is working. And then I'm going to say over here, login as the user we were given. Now I'm going to set my data variable, which contains all the parameters that will be sent with my request. So we've got the CSRF token, which is saved in the variable CSRF token. And then we've got username. And password. Okay, this looks good. And then we're going to perform the request. So we're going to say s.post, and the URL is going to be the login URL, because you could see over here it's a login endpoint. So login URL. And again, we use the post method over here because it is a post request. We're going to say data is equal to data, verify is equal to false, and proxies is equal to proxy, so that the request gets passed in burp. And then we're going to save the response of this request right over here in a variable called res. And we're going to say if you could see the logout string in res, then we successfully logged in, because you don't see the logout string unless you're logged in as a user in the application. So we're going to say print successfully logged in as the user that we were given. Otherwise, say failed to log in as the user that we were given. And then we're going to end the program, because if we can't even log in, we definitely can't exploit the vulnerability, because this is an authenticated vulnerability. You require an account on the application in order to exploit it. Okay, so let's assume that we were able to successfully log in as the user. Now, the next step is to access the admin panel. So if we go over here in the request right here, you could see there's the admin panel, and the request that we performed was to delete the user. Now, it's a GET request, so we don't need a CSRF token anymore. All we need is to make sure that we pass these two cookies, so the session cookie and the admin cookie, and set the admin cookie to true, and then use this endpoint over here in order to delete the Carlos user. So that's what we're going to do next. Let's hit enter and add another comment saying retrieve session cookie. So we need the session cookie of the logged in user, which is this one right over here, and we're going to retrieve it from the request. And the way to do that is, let's create a variable called session cookie, and then we're going to say r.cookies.getDict. So the dictionary.get the value of the item in the dictionary that is called session, which is our session cookie. Okay, so this obtains the session cookie and saves it in a variable called session cookie. And then next, what we're going to do is we're going to visit the admin panel and delete the user Carlos. So to do that, we need a few variables. So first, the URL to delete a user. So delete Carlos user URL, and that'll be equal to the URL, so the main URL of the application that we pass as a command line argument, plus the endpoint to delete the Carlos user, which is this one right over here. Let's copy that. Next, we need to set our cookies. So again, this request takes in two cookies, the session cookie and the admin cookie. The session cookie we already obtained using this piece of code over here and saved it in the variable session cookie. So let's set that. The first cookie is called session, and it's set to the value session cookie. And then the second cookie is called admin, and we're just going to set that to true. Okay, this looks good. Now the next step is just to perform the request because we've got all the variables needed in the request. And the way to do that is, let's say request.get, and it's a get method because it's a get method right over here. It takes in the delete Carlos user URL. We're going to set cookies to cookies, verify to false because we don't want to verify TLS certificates, and then proxies to proxies because we want the request to get passed in burp just so that we could debug it in case it's not working as intended. And then we're going to say if r.statuscode is equal to 200. So if you get a 200 OK message, that means we were able to successfully delete the Carlos user. So we're going to add that. Otherwise, print failed to delete Carlos user, and then we're going to end the program. So if you don't get a 200 OK message, that means you weren't able to delete the Carlos user. So we're going to print that message and then end the program. All right, this looks good. Let's summarize the program before we run it. So essentially over here, we've got our main method. It takes in two arguments, the name of the program and the URL of the application. If it's run incorrectly, it'll print the usage instructions. If it's run correctly, it'll save the URL in the variable URL, and it'll call the function delete user. Now in delete user, the first thing that we do is obtain the CSRF token in the login page. That's done using the get CSRF token function. Once we obtain the CSRF token, it gets passed in the request with the username and password in order to log in as the user that we were given. Once we're logged in as the user, the next thing that we do is obtain the session token of the logged in user and then set another cookie called admin to true in order to exploit the broken access control vulnerability. And then from there, we try to delete the user. If we get a 200 OK message, then we've successfully deleted the user. If we don't, then we failed to delete the Carlos user and the program ends. All right, let's run it and see if we have any errors in our program. So let's say Python 3, access control lab 3. And I think the challenge might have timed out, so we're going to have to rerun this. Let's see. Oh, and it didn't. So let's copy this. Paste. Remove the trailing slash and hit enter. And we do have an error. So if we go to line number 25, and it's right over here. So there shouldn't be a comma over here. It should be a semicolon. Let's clear this and run it again. And here we go. So we get congratulations, you solved the lab. And over here, first it tells you it successfully logged in as the user, and then it was able to delete the Carlos user. All right, so we successfully completed the exercise by exploiting the vulnerability first manually and then scripting it in Python. In the next lab, we'll look at more complex cases of broken access control vulnerabilities.